Murat of The Athletic joins us now. I mean, there's been a bunch of stages of this season that have been somewhat eye-opening, Murat, and maybe we shouldn't be surprised with what this team has done up until this point, but pretty special run for a team that is showing no signs of wilting as we get closer to this midseason break for the Four Nations.
Yeah, and I do want to definitely talk about the lack of wilt, so to speak, in the Winnipeg Jets right now. As for just the overall scheme of things, this is the spot. This is the time. This is the part of the season where the Winnipeg Jets are supposed to fall apart. The story has been written. We saw it, a small version of it last season with underlying numbers, even if wins often came. We saw 2 years ago where late January was the beginning of a really pronounced swoon for the team. It's been seasons before that as well. When Paul Maurice stepped down, the Jets were in a playoff spot. They went on to lose that spot. Like, there are so many different times, and yet the Jets are on a 7-game winning streak. And the one game where it really looked like they'd come off their game, Scott Arniel meets with the team after it, meets with the media after it, and says, no, that wasn't good enough. These guys asked for higher standards, and we set higher standards for ourselves. So let's meet them. And then the players, instead of wilting in response to that, came back out with some really quality efforts, leading to 7 straight wins, including that Washington game. And let me tell you, I've talked to people in Washington. They are impressed with the quality of the Winnipeg Jets hockey team right now. So that Carolina game as well, they really, I think it would just be too sweet to flip the script on its head and head into this break here with an 8th straight game. That would be too sweet for Winnipeg. So I hope you all get to enjoy that.
Listen, I want to get to your latest on the contracts with the Winnipeg Jets and the player poll and all that. But I do wonder, with how well this team is playing right now, and I'm not suggesting they're just going to stand pat, but I do wonder if the way that some players have stepped up in the absence of guys like Adam Lowry, with the way that they played as consistently as they have all year, with the results that have followed it, I do wonder the fine line between being aggressive and trying to make your team as good as it possibly can, with the worry that the old, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and changing too much to a team that has been so good, so consistently all year.
I think there is some of that. Like, I'm going to sort of talk out of both sides, so to speak, about that. But one of the things I was struck by, speaking to Kevin Cheveldayoff, a couple weeks ago in Denver, was this idea, like, as analytical as they are and as hockey savvy as they are, I tend to think that emotions play a pretty big role in the memory of NHL executives and coaches. So certain times of their careers that were maybe emotionally more impactful, I think they learn lessons from that time almost disproportionately. And what do I mean by that? That's pretty vague. He was talking about the Winnipeg Jets 2018 playoff run and the Western Conference final trip. Okay, whatever, Vegas beat them. That was kind of a surprise. And then Washington goes out and wins the Stanley Cup. Well, he made a point of saying, Stas was an amazing fit. And the Washington Capitals at that particular trade deadline, they went out and they addressed depth only. And he was seeming to say, let's pump the brakes on absolutely needing a big name, big swing acquisition. If you have certain needs and they're a little bit more on the depth nature, and you have the chemistry higher up in the lineup, he seemed to be saying, pump the brakes on needing that kind of swing. And I get that. There are times when you watch the Winnipeg Jets where it seems like they have everything that they could ever want. And that's nights when the Scheifele line is going. Recently, I mean, that second line is on fire. Cole Perfetti in particular, who isn't supposed to be able to get it done at this time of year, 8 points in his last 6 games. Nikolai Ehlers has been consistently good, other than maybe a couple weeks right after his injury. Vladislav Nemesnikov is producing again. So now you can believe in that in a way that I think a lot of people were doubting about this time of year and crunch time. The Lowry line, when it's the Lowry line, has been so effective. The Niederreiter, Kupari, et cetera line also incredibly effective. And then you look at Morrissey and Sandberg holding down to the top four on their pairs. There are times when they have everything they could need. And I would almost understand thinking like, hey, there's something special here. Let's not mess with that. And then the complete flip side of that, and I won't spend as many words on it, is this is also a team that sent Brad Lambert and Parker Ford down for 24 hours this week to save a tiny bit of cap space just to make sure they're accruing the maximum amount, and expect that same move probably heading into the break coming up, because they want to maximize every last penny and dollar for potential acquisitions heading into that trade deadline. So yes, it's an incredibly difficult question for the Jets to ask themselves. And I think they're putting themselves in a position to max things out as best as they can.
Well, and one of the things that I know you've talked about it, but I think generally it may be a little underreported, is just the effects of that salary cap and the very nice position the Winnipeg Jets find themselves in heading into that March 7th trade deadline, considering where they've been in relation to the cap all year and the amount of space that they have been accruing if they did have the opportunity for a player that might come at a much higher ticket than maybe normal acquisitions are.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up. That's worth talking about. If you go strictly by projected cap space, Winnipeg is, I think they're 10th or 11th most in the league, but there are only 2 playoff teams ahead of them, and they're wild card teams, the last that I checked. Like, the combination of being a legitimate cup contender and having pure accruing day-by-day cap space is uniquely a Winnipeg thing. That is a strength for the Jets heading in to the trade deadline. There may be good players on inefficient contracts that they can afford that other teams can't. There might be lower acquisition prices as a result. If they can fit in a contract and they don't need to ask the other team to retain, well, maybe that first round pick becomes a second, or the second becomes a third in terms of the ask. That's a really good spot to be in. And it's not as though they're alone in having opportunity. There are teams that, will have players on LTIR and thus have a cushion with which to work. But in terms of cap space that's building every single day, the Jets are in as good of a spot as it gets. You look at the number of points they have in the standings, combine that. You have to tip your hat. You have to tip your hat to the management that made decisions. And they made bets that might even burn them someday in the future. Gabriel Velarde will get a raise. Cole Perfetti's next contract will be more expensive when it's long-term. But right here and now, those shorter deals mean a whole bunch of space building up every single day under that cap, so that by deadline day, the Jets, will be probably in the best position in the National Hockey League in that way of thinking as well. And that deserves praise.
Yeah, just as long as they can get players that don't have Winnipeg on the no trade list, which I'm sure was a big topic yesterday as the thing came out. What does the Athletic have it out for us? We have to make that the first question. Let's do this thing and let's just plaster that right up there. Although, as I've been saying for the last couple of days, both here and in some other markets, that can change quickly with the championship caliber team. It's happened with Edmonton. They were always on that list. And I think the Jets are sort of a long playoff run away from maybe reminding people that, it might be cold and it might not be the sexiest drive from the airport, but there's a lot of players on this team that'll tell you there's a lot of great things about playing in this city. And if you can have a legitimate chance to win a cup, that can change people's opinions very quickly.
Oh, very quickly. And I think that some of those having Winnipeg on no trade lists can be done by default sometimes. And then they actually get asked and they think about it and they're like, well, actually, Winnipeg's really good. That changes things, right? Paul Stastny would be probably the most famous example of that. Mm-hmm. He had Blake Wheeler, of course, recruiting him a little bit and all that. But the Jets were a wagon and he knew that. And that changed the calculus for him. That was a special time, right? So that happens. And it is funny, like, how it's like I have so many different angles and perspectives on this player poll. There are many questions on this player poll. What coach would you most like to play for outside of your market? Who would you least like to play for? That can be contentious. One of the questions was, should Gary Bettman retire? that can be contentious. They talked about best and worst facilities for visiting teams in terms of like the workout gear and dressing rooms and all that sort of stuff. And like markets like Toronto got absolutely roasted in terms of what they provide for opposing teams. There's a lot there, but because the no trade clause question gets asked, and it's also the first one in the presentation, and I saw some tweets about it, I think it's easy for a Winnipegger to go, this shit again? Oh, I don't like to swear on your show, Huss, but like that's the feeling, isn't it?
For sure.
Like, and there's an angle from which I actually completely relate to that. Like, I can personally say, as a Winnipegger who writes for in a league that's much broader than Winnipeg, that's trying to, I hope my stories get read in Winnipeg and outside of it. Like, there are personal moments that I'm stopping myself from completely unpacking here, that I have run up against the Winnipeg stigma, and I hate it because of the quality of this place and the people in it. And at the same time, it is on more no trade lists than anyone else in the league. And I think who's on your no trade clause is a valid question to ask. It's a unique thing to think about. I think we all want to know. And hey, has anything changed because Winnipeg's, in contention for the President's Trophy? Apparently not yet. But to your point, a playoff run might do it as well. And then the other angle that I think of is when players come to the city, this hasn't been the case for literally everybody, but a lot of them stay. And a lot of them do buy into the community that grows on them. And one of the smartest things, like I haven't always loved Kevin Cheveldayoff's media, especially in groups and things like that. But one of the smartest things that I've seen him do is lean into Winnipeg's hold as a strength, which he did in an interview with Pierre Lebrun for The Athletic earlier this week. And he made a point, and I don't think this was by accident, to talk about the group of guys that goes ice fishing. And this is something I've talked about with Connor Hellebuck, with Alex Iafallo, with Dylan Sandberg, with all the guys that go. It's been in stories that I've written. There are people on the Winnipeg Jets who adore the fact that it's easy to detach from it all, head out to an ice fishing shack and just sit on the ice, fish, do their thing, and completely turn their brains off of hockey. And the best goaltender of his generation, perhaps, happens to be one of those.
The ringleader.
The ringleader. It's a Winnipeg strength, which you might not think of if there's some player out there that would rather play in Los Angeles or Florida or whatever. Okay, fine. Who needs them? Because it just so happens that the best is the ringleader in that way. So I think it's important that the Jets spend effort to celebrate those who want to be here. And I think they're leaning into it year by year a little bit more. There's a pivot happening here where I don't know if you got this. People always said, make them the Green Bay of the NHL, right? Like small market, such passion, lean into all those things that other people smack talk about. And I get a little point of Winnipeg pride when they do that, because this place isn't for everybody. And the people that it is for, well, we celebrate them.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think that in so many walks of life, the quality of whether it be an individual, a person, an organization, a team, is authenticity. And, to your point, Winnipeg isn't for everyone. And there's a lot of people that can't hack the cold. And, there's some people that, they're far more concerned with the bright lights or the attention that they'll get. I mean, whatever, that's fine. People are different. But I think for this organization and what they have done so well is acknowledged who they are, have been unapologetic about it, and then have worked through building the culture of the team, the organization that goes right up to the top, the way that the players are treated from the second that they get here, and try to say there's a lot of things that we aren't, but this is what we are. And it has resonated with a lot of the players that have decided to stay here, that have become the core of a team that is at the top of the NHL standings right now. And I would definitely argue, regardless of perception and no trade lists and all that. I would say right now, today, in February of 2025, moving into the trade deadline and, going into the playoffs. And obviously what happens in the playoffs is going to be a big, big factor, and there's no getting around that. But if this team continues to play the way that they have been and achieve success and do it with a group of players that have seemed to buy in the way they have to being in Winnipeg, I think the chances of having players that come and get a taste of it stay continues to increase. And it might even get to the point, if you truly are thought of as a legitimate Stanley Cup contender around the league, that come July 1, there's a number of players that might not have picked up the phone before that would be a little bit more interested in as to what Kevin Cheveldayoff and Larry Simmons have to say, potentially being Winnipeg Jets in the future. While we're talking about contracts, your latest bet piece up in the at the Athletic is on the skyrocketing salary cap. And Elliot Friedman, I read this piece at the start of the show, has said that Cheveldayoff has said that this period of time during the break is going to be a time to hopefully get some stuff done when it comes to new contracts and negotiations with agents. What's your perspective on how the clarity about where this cap is going may affect Winnipeg's ability to keep players and, where their targets are right now in the short term, assuming that, what Elliot said is true and that there will be negotiations and discussions about getting some contract security and clarity on players that don't have deals for next year?
Yeah, and I mean, to what Elliot is saying, that would be a change for Cheveldayoff, because up until recently, Cheveldayoff was telling us, "Hey, I've been in touch with everybody. Like, the communication channels are open, but let's be careful. I don't want to characterize anything that we've done as outright negotiations. That hasn't necessarily happened. And if that does start to happen over this break, it'll sort of mark an acceleration of building next year and beyond's Winnipeg Jets team." And it'll also, I think, I would say that it would be well timed. Obviously, Cheveldayoff was not surprised by the increase in cap. I don't think anybody around the NHL has been surprised by that. But to have fixed numbers now, to have numbers that if they change will be only moderately so and have to be agreed by both parties, that I think helps grant some clarity in terms of what the contract numbers can be. And he'll also have the time, and Winnipeg has Josh Morrissey, Kyle Connor, and Connor Hellebuck at the Four Nations, and that's it, right? Like, none of those guys need new contracts yet, and so that allows Cheveldayoff to focus on, perhaps the Ehlers of the world. I want to put Dylan Samberg's name front of line, Gabriel Velarde as well. And that's just a short list, and we get into all of that in that piece that you mentioned. I think Cheveldayoff got burnt a little bit, or at least some players. Brendan Dillon was pretty clear. He felt burnt by the fact that conversations were pretty superficial throughout most of the year. And ultimately, he did receive an offer from the Jets, but it was kind of a late thing. And so his mind was made, which has led to the Dylan Samberg opportunity. But I think that there's been some management on Cheveldayoff's part not to go too far down any one road, lest other people feel left out, which feels awkward to me. Just that feels like an awkward bit of personnel management in terms of these contracts too.
Well, let me just quickly talk to you about Ehlers, because he is the player that I think is obviously he's an unrestricted free agent. He's been here for a long time. We certainly haven't heard any reports that he's banging down the Jets' door to sign a new deal. And he's an incredibly popular and incredibly important player on this hockey club right now. Do you think the increase in the salary cap changes anything for Nikolai Ehlers? And, as we'll probably ask you this a few more times later on this season, but, where we are right now with the team having so much success, do you feel differently about Ehlers' possibility of sticking around beyond this year a little bit more than maybe you would have early on this year?
My instinctive sense and to be clear, I'm not in Nikolai Ehlers' head about this, right? But just my instinctive sense is that his odds of staying don't change, because I can make the same arguments in both directions. Winnipeg will be in a better spot from which to sign Ehlers by virtue of the cap going up, and so will other teams, right? Like that when the cap has gone up in previous years, we all think, hey, the NHL GMs have learned their lesson and they're not going to overspend on July 1. And every time they have space, they overspend on July 1. So if there are teams that get more space as a result of this than they were anticipating, maybe the cost goes up, and that probably affects other teams in the same way that it does Winnipeg in terms of being able to give Nikolai Ehlers a contract. I don't think in Winnipeg he'd get more than the 8.5 that Hellebuck and Scheifele are making. I don't know if he would get that or more on the open market. I think his playoffs could probably go a long way towards cementing his reputation as having arrived. But the actual sense of whether he stays or goes, I think, continues to be a choice that he and Winnipeg get to make, because they should have cap space. They have ample cap space from which to sign him if they can come to a number they agree upon, and if he believes that he wants to stay, and if they believe that they want to make him a long-term priority. I've had my doubts on those fronts. He's been a player that's been loosely shopped in years past, or some negotiations around trading have happened for him. I don't think they view him as part of the core the same way they do Hellebuck, Scheifele, Connor, etc. He might be ready for something new. And then the last thought, like, this is a whole bunch of nothing. I don't know if he's staying or he's going, right? But the last thought that I have, and I keep circling back to, is I think that Nikolai Ehlers is a fairly sentimental person, and I think that he loves his teammates and adores that. And he might not be the first in line to sign up for a -40 day on the ice fishing shack, but I think that he really buys into this community and this city and this place. So if there is an opportunity for him here, and he isn't able to sort of like find a blue sky version somewhere else, I can't think of Winnipeg as a bad place for him to stay, based on everything, especially with the power play time, everything that's gone so well for him this year.
Fully agree on that. And I'll just to wrap this, I will say that I don't think there's anything that can be more helpful to the Jets in potentially keeping Nikolai Ehlers than to keep this train rolling the way it is right now and keep on winning hockey games and go and do some special things in the playoffs, because that's tough to leave. Even if there's money and warmer climates out there, at the end of the day, these guys are professional athletes. They're here trying to win a Stanley Cup. And if you feel that you have a legitimate chance to do that on a team that can do that with players that are going to be there, that you've been with building up to this point for a long time, it does make it closer to go. And we certainly haven't read in any publications that ship has sailed, but I will remind people that we heard that about some other players that are now on long-term deals with the Winnipeg Jets. So until it's done, I think anything is possible, and I know a lot of Jet fans will be crossing their fingers that we'll get more than just this season of number 27 in a Jet jersey. Folks, get on over to The Athletic for more. It's a long piece, very interesting, what the skyrocketing cap means for the Jets, Nikolai Ehlers, Neil Pionk, and more. And, of course, the player poll and much more is there on the NHL, and great coverage around the league as well.